I think, did she add? Yep. So there's a questions and answer period that we have now. We have 35 minutes left. Is that right, Jess? Is Jess still here? Okay, so I'm going to start with questions that are in the box right now while Jess talks to us. Okay, so for Delphin, yes, the slides will be available. This slideshow, as well as, oh, let me give you all the PDF. Hang on a second here. So here is an Ally Resources PDF. This will also be on the website by the end of the week. The slides will be on the website by the end of the week. And the recording of this will be on the website as soon as I can get it all worked out. How does romantic orientation differ from sexual orientation? Sexual orientation is not only about behavior, but also emotional intimacy. So romantic and sexual orientation, the way that I understand them, right? So I don't experience sexual attraction. That's about who I am interested in having sexual relationships with, or how I experience an attraction to those relationships. So the difference there for me is that I am interested in the emotional intimacy, but not the sexual intimacy. And so when we delineate between the two so that it's not only sexual intimacy that's emotional intimacy, but other things can also be emotional intimacy, then those other things, specifically things that are tied to romantic feelings, like, you know, I experience romantic attraction when I'm with somebody and we have super awesome mind meld. Like, we have an amazing conversation, and it's just about the awesomest thing that I've ever had in my life, because we had this super awesome conversation about whatever it was, a new experience, a class we were in, a thing we did together, whatever it is. That's when I experience my crushes, right? But that is never about a physical attraction for me, and it's never about a behavior. It's never about a behavior for me. It's always about a romantic attraction to someone else. I hope that answers your question, Delphin. Sarah asks, Sarah, where you're at UMass? Is UMass near Boston? No, Amherst. I don't know Massachusetts very well, but I do know that there's a huge, huge meetup for ACEs in Boston, and they'll probably know some people in Amherst. So send me an email, and this goes for everyone too. If you want to send me an email, Sarah, and I'll put you in touch with the people in Boston, and maybe they'll know people in Amherst who can help you to go and talk to LGBT groups, because the first thing you'll need is a posse, right? You'll need to get together some people and say, hey, we want to include asexuality in our LGBT groups. And so if we want to include it, then we can do things like, you can bring the documentary to your campus. There's a documentary called Asexual, which is a 75-minute long film. We own some copies of it that we loan out for educational screening. You can also buy a copy of it for your institution. And it provides an introduction to asexuality that's much more in-depth than my 40-minute one, and also provides a lot of really provocative questions and conversation. So you can bring the documentary to your campus. You can do an asexual event on your campus, like a panel or a workshop of some kind, which is where the Boston ACEs would be a great assist to you, I'm sure. And you could also do things like take pamphlets and booklets off the website and get them into your LGBT center by talking to the director of programming there or the director of programs there and figuring out what it takes to get those resources in that center. Does that give you some steps forward, Sarah? You're welcome. Absolutely. And also, my email box is open to anyone who is wanting to plan an event, is having trouble planning an event. We didn't really talk about, sort of the events that we've had in the past, but we've had dozens of college campuses that have done, whether it's screenings or panels or workshops or things like that in the past few years. So we've got selection of slideshows that you can pull off of the website, including this one by the end of the week. But there's other slideshows you can pull off the website that can help you do presentations as well. More questions?
From Alina that says, what's the difference between a romantic attraction and a queer platonic relationship?
So I'm not sure I can fully answer that because as I said while we were talking about queer platonic relationships, it's not my experience. I don't usually experience those relationships or at least use that word. My understanding is that the folks who identify themselves as aromantic have a set of relationships that to them are extremely important to them. And they sometimes use that word queer platonic to describe those relationships. These are people who they're making commitments with, they're spending a lot of time with, they're doing a lot of things together, feeling really positive, obviously, and really powerful about the time that they're spending together. And because of that, they're choosing to include queer platonic as part of the way they describe their relationship. Separate from that, romantic attraction is an attraction, a way that people feel about one another. I'm pretty sure that romantic aces have also used, and Jess has got a Wikipedia link for you as well, but I'm pretty sure that the romantic asexual folk have also used queer platonic. I just haven't used it, so I don't want to try and speak for somebody else's experience, but queer platonic, to me, the understanding of it is that set of relationships that are very, very close and personal on, that are not just the people who I casually have a beer with on Friday night. You're welcome. I'd love to talk to you about your experiences on your campuses as well, so feel free to include those in your commentary. Delphin, how are religious communities engaging in asexuality or not engaging? This is a really interesting question. So far, to my knowledge, there hasn't been any level of intensive outreach to religious communities about asexuality. So we get scattered reports. We've met with some Universalist Unitarian folk, that's a Christian denomination, who have said that they want to be super supportive and super inclusive. We've seen online that there have been folk who have been in the Christian faith as well, who have been ostracized from their community for engaging in asexuality or talking about asexuality. We've seen folks from the Muslim and Jewish community talk about their experiences online, although not extensively yet. One of the most fun crossovers for me, probably because I am pagan, is the pagan asexuality crossover, and there's a lot of those folk running around. But nobody is having an active conversation about it yet. And that's something that I'm really excited about for the future. We've had some people who have written some pamphlets about asexuality and Christianity. Those are up on our website. We have some more that are forthcoming that are about, faith groups and asexuality, but there's not an active engagement yet. So. Does that get at the heart of what you were looking for, Delphin? Well, I hope it will because, I'm sorry, Delphin, for the audio. Delphin says, as a person of faith, it inspires me to rock the boat and bring up the conversation. And I hope that you will, Delphin, because there is a need for that work to be done in the asexual community right now, and for people to be talking about it in a religious context. I'm not sure what that conversation looks like yet, but it's very exciting that you'll join it and be a part of it. Thank you. I'm going to ask a question to all of you. Have any of you had asexual events on your campuses or have asexual panels or anything like that on your campus? So Armani says, to my knowledge, there has never been anything for ACEs on campus, including organizations. The LGBT Center has a few books. So you're not alone in that, Armani. And it says, I guess Heather says here, we have had students with an asexual identity talk about their experiences with our LGBTQ student org, so they are promoting awareness of their lived experiences. And Katie says, no, I would have liked to, had I been more familiar with asexuality when I first arrived to join one of our LGBTQA groups. I do share it with my school friends on Facebook. Awesome. So everybody's at a different stage of this here, right? Which is great, because that's sort of the way that asexuality is happening across the country right now. Some campuses, when I ask this question of campuses, when I talk to them across the country, some campuses have lots of different organizations that include asexuality, have lots of resources. Some even have an asexuality student club on campus, though that's very rare. And the ranges from there all the way down to, we have some students who are talking about it, or I'd like to be an ally and talk about it so that people will be able to talk about it on campus. So I think that it's really important for all of you to be able to use the resources that we have to get you from where you are now to where you want to be. So whatever that is, whether it's more asexual inclusion on your campus, or better understanding personally, or having a group on your campus, or engaging your LGBTQ org, there are a lot of resources available that'll help you do that. Question from Campus Pride. Is there any tension among the asexual community about whether asexual identities fit alongside LGBTQ identities, that asexual should or shouldn't be conceived of as part of the queer community? So yes, there is some tension about this, and there's folks on all different sides of this issue. So the LGBT community, as we commonly conceive of it, the lesbian, gay, bisexual, and transgender community, is not a new invention, right? It used to be the lesbian and gay community back in the 80s, and then it was the LGBO community in the 90s, the lesbian, gay, bisexual, other community in the 90s. And then through a lot of internal activism, it became the LGBT community in the 2000s. And that's what it's been since then. So there's been some tension about adding anything new to that, as there was tension when bisexual got added, as there was tension when transgender was added. The majority of the asexual community either identifies with the LGBT community or as allies of the LGBT community. 40% identify with the community, another 40% as allies. So because of that, there's a huge amount of LGBT intersection with asexuality. It's part of the reason why I focus so strongly on the LGBT community. There are people in the asexual community who don't want to be a part of the LGBT community for whatever reason. There are people in the LGBT community who don't want asexuality to be a part of the LGBT community. Overwhelmingly, these are smaller numbers than the numbers of people who are understanding of asexuality as a non-normative sexual orientation. And so overwhelmingly, as there's been an increase in knowledge about asexuality, there's been an increased inclusion in LGBT spaces. This webinar itself is just another instance of that. When I started doing this work 3 years ago, the task force the National Gay and Lesbian Task Force didn't have a single thing on their agenda anywhere about asexuality. There wasn't a single LGBT organization in the country talking about it. So yes, there is some tension, but that tension is largely around whether or not we should expand the LGBT community to include more people of other varying sexual orientations. And the answer to that question, for me at least, is always yes, we should be more inclusive. We should err on the side of including more people and more people's issues as we move forward together. That's what builds a strong movement, and that's what builds a strong political power to be able to create the real change that we want to see in society. I was a little ranty. Did I answer your question, Jess? Cool. And oh, go ahead.
So folks might be familiar with the Campus Pride Index, which rates campuses across the country based on how LGBT friendly they are. And so we're actually redoing the index right now, and we're adding several questions relating to asexuality. So in addition to staff having to be trained on LGBT issues, they'll have to be trained on asexual issues too. So folks can be out on the lookout for that.
That's awesome. I'm really excited about that. And Jess, you didn't know this when you said that just then, but when I was at UPenn 2 weeks ago, there was a young asexual student who was a sophomore in high school who brought her mom to the event I was having at UPenn, who asked specifically about how do I make sure that I go to a college that understands asexuality. So thank you, because that's going to be awesome. What do you think of some people using the acronym GSRM? I love it. Personally, I love it. I'm a student right now, right? Jess said that at the top of this webinar. I've been writing papers about it, actually. GSRM stands for Gender, Sexual, and Romantic Minorities. And this is intended to be a replacement phrase for LGBT or an expansion of LGBT. Because when we talk about lesbian, gay, bisexual, those are all sexual minorities. When we talk about transgender and intersex, those are gender minorities. When we talk about asexual, that's a romantic minority, whether the person is hetero, homo, bi, pan, or a romantic, they're a romantic minority. So in that way, we can talk about gender and sexual romantic minorities rather than talking about subsections of those minorities. I think that that's really valuable and really important. I think it gives us the opportunity to expand as a community without having to rebrand ourselves every 10 years, which is basically what's happened in the LGBT community for the last 35 or 40 years. I think that it's going to allow us to be able to have a better conversation about what it means to be a sexual minority, what it means to be a gender minority. I think it also gives us access to talk about, sort of intersections in a way that's really powerful because, and, hear me out on this, what happens when somebody experiences sexual attraction but not romantic attraction? That's a really interesting intersection that exists that people have identified at, although it's obviously a very small amount of people, limited to the number of people that understand, asexuality further than just a very one-on-one level, right? So people who identify as sexual but aromantic, that's an intersection that needs to be explored. People who identify, as Delphin was talking about. Oh, you're very welcome, Delphin. As Delphin was talking about the intersection of faith and asexuality, I've been specifically focused on LGBT and asexuality for the last several years, but also there's a lot of work to be done in media and asexuality, in fiction writing and asexuality, in the medical field and asexuality, in political activism, political advocacy, and asexuality. And so having a broader term like gender, sexual, romantic minorities is what will allow us to have a much broader community and will allow us to all fight together for all of the different things that we're looking for, rather than just having lesbian, gay, bisexual, transgender, which so often gets shortened to lesbian and gay, or just the gay community, which leaves out a lot of different people, myself included. So that's an awesome, awesome question. Sure. The question is, can you talk more about policy issues that impact the asexual community? Absolutely. So there's a variety of different policy issues. One of the ones that's a hot button issue that you'll be hearing more about more in the future, in the more immediate future, is employment protections. Obviously, there's a conversation in the LGBT community about employment protections specifically, and very rightfully so, about transgender employment protections. If you don't know, you can be fired for being gay in, I think it's 28 states, or 29 states rather, and you can be fired for being transgender in 38 states. 29 states if you're gay, 38 states if you're transgender. That's a huge, huge, huge problem. Currently, there's no states that have laws against asexuals working in those states. However, what we have right now is a couple of things. We have a perfect storm of a young community that's just coming out that nobody knows about yet, and they'll be joining the workforce in the next few years because the majority of them are in high school and college right now. They'll be joining the workforce in the next couple of years, and asexuality will be more known about and more talked about. And so what we'll have is this opportunity for this discrimination to exist. Because we have that opportunity, we've done some studies about that. The study that we did, I didn't do it, but there was a study that happened last summer, McInnes and Hodgson study, that talks about anti-asexual bias and specifically talks about a bias against employment. There's some other stuff that's in there too that's really good, but that's going to be one issue that we're going to be talking about, is employment protections for asexual people. Part of our argument there is we'd rather do it now when there's no political lightning rod attached to our community, rather than try and fix it 20 years from now when we are in the midst of, cleaning up the discrimination that we can see coming. History can indicate to us that those of minority groups are discriminated against, especially those as they're coming out. Asexuals, the McInnes and Hodgson study shows asexuals to be thought of as inhuman and cold and calculative and very robotic. I think robotic was the word that it used. So that's one policy issue. Other policy issues include things like, what does adoption law look like in asexual relationships? There's a video of a therapist in Canada talking about a case study client that was an asexual couple who were denied adoption because they were asexual. There is a conversation to be had about housing protections. Yeah, I have a link to that study. Give me just a second. I'll put it in the box in a second. There's possible housing discrimination. The McInnes and Hodgson study also talks about that. And then there's also health issues. In the asexual community, we have a health conversation that needs to be happening, and there needs to be some policy around that. We need to make sure that we have access to scans for people who have cervixes and uteruses. We need to make sure that we have access to scans for people who have penises and prostates. We need to make sure that we have conversation and dialogue around those scans being important, even when somebody chooses celibacy. We need to have dialogue about healthy relationships and how to build healthy relationships. The teaching consent conversation that comes from this, this presentation here on a broader scale. And then another policy issue for us is the issue of sort of the rape discourse in our society, which is a social issue that's happening right now that will, I'm sure, turn into a policy issue. And that discourse is really important to us because of the problem of corrective rape and a lot of pressure to have sex that ultimately leads to consent that isn't informed consent. So, oh, you're welcome, Katie. Let me get this link for Sarah while somebody else asks another question. So I hope you won't mind, Sarah. This is from my personal website. It's right there. It's the only link in the folder. And yeah, the latest edition of ENDA, Campus Pride points out, and rightfully says that the latest edition of ENDA is going to be introduced in DC this Thursday. They're going to make a go at it this time around. We will be talking about employment non-discrimination with congresspeople and senators and things like that in the future, but we did not talk to them before this version of the bill came out. So this version of the bill isn't going to include asexuality, but what the thing with the ENDA bill is, and this is important about the ENDA bill, is that they're either going to say sexual orientation or gender identity, or they're going to say sexual orientation, which is defined as homosexual, heterosexual, bisexual. And if they say sexual orientation is defined as, then it's very important for asexuality to be on the list. Otherwise, we are not included in a definition of sexual orientation as far as legality is concerned. We've got about 5 or 6 minutes left. I want to make sure you have access to my email address and our website. Our website is asexualawarenessweek.com, and you can visit there for the resources I was talking about, as well as access to videos, slideshows, and all sorts of other things that can help you to include asexuality more in your work on your campuses. For the people who were from Barcelona, is that you, Alina? There is a little bit of Spanish language content, but there's not a lot of it. So there's a person in Colombia, in Bogota, who does some Spanish language work and works with Avon ES, which is Avon Espanol, and they are doing a little bit of production of materials in Spanish, but there's certainly not a lot of it. So if you translate anything, will you send it back to me so that I can make it available to everyone? Thank you. I really appreciate it. And then Jess, notes, and I really want to say again, thank you to Campus Pride for having this workshop, because I know it's going to be a great tool not for just us today, but also for us to use in a continuing basis in the work that we're doing. So I'm so grateful to Jess McDonald and Campus Pride for having us to this workshop, and for allowing us to be able to give you these resources. The Ally handout has some more links on it for you, including some great links to Ask Trevor responses that the Trevor Project gave that were really, really amazing responses to people who were talking about coming out as asexual or questioning sexuality, things like that. And then I also want to make sure that I ask you an important question I ask at the end of every one of my workshops, which is, did you learn something? Okay, good. I'm getting S's. I'm really glad. And, I want to make sure that you all know that this is important work that you can be a part of as well, just simply by talking about it. I will close with this story, which I sometimes close with, of a colleague of mine who works with the asexual community, who heard about asexuality for the first time at the salon while she was having her hair done, because somebody in the next booth was talking about it, and she said, oh my goodness, that might be me, went home, looked on Google, found the community on Google, and that was how she found out about asexuality. There is no amount of visibility and awareness that is too small right now. There is no amount of doing this work that is not going to be helpful to the folk out there who may not know that there's a community yet. It took me 5 years of hitting my head against a brick wall to find asexuality and the community, and to understand myself and the way that I experience the world. And we can help other people to not have to experience so much frustration in the in-between time if we will make the resources available to them. So thank you for joining me in all of that. And I hope you all have a lovely, wonderful day. My email box is open to all of you.
And if you need more information about Campus Pride or have any questions for me, my email is jess, Jess, @campuspride.org. Thanks.